Don't you dare say that name." Her voice cracked a sound of pure, undiluted betrayal. "The boy who gave me this ring, the one who made a promise to me under the old oak tree, he would have died before he became someone like you." The word struck the man in the tailored suit with the force of a physical blow. The old oak tree, the promise, the ring. It all came crashing back, a 20-year-old memory buried under a mountain of wealth and lies. He looked at the woman he had been sent to destroy, his voice a choked whisper. "Maya. That boy. They called me Leo." A strangled pause filled the air, heavy with the weight of a shattered reality. "God, Maya. It was me. What would you do if the person sent to ruin your life was the one soul from your past you were meant to trust?" Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when a broken promise comes back to collect its debt. The boardroom was a tomb of polished mahogany and chilled air 30 floors above a city that sprawled below like a circuit board of pulsing light. Ethan Vance, CEO of Whitaker Global, saw none of it. He stared through the floor-to-ceiling glass, his reflection a ghost superimposed over the skyline, a man in a suit that cost more than a car, with eyes that held the vacant echo of a life lived for others. On the massive screen behind him, projections of profit margins and 5-year growth strategies glowed in the dim light. They were his numbers, his victories, yet they felt as foreign as a language he had been forced to learn, but never truly understood. His world was one of silent nods of conversations conducted in the sterile language of acquisitions and leverage. It was a world built by his father, Carter Vance, and Ethan was merely its most valuable, most captive asset. In the corner of the room, a television was muted, but the headlines scrolled by with unfeeling clarity. Housing crisis deepens as corporate buyouts displace local communities. Another small town fights back against luxury redevelopment. For Ethan, these were abstract concepts, the distant hum of a world he observed but never touched. The cost of progress, his father always said. A necessary, unavoidable part of building an empire. He was due to be married in the fall to Elise Harrington, a woman as polished and perfect as the mahogany table before him. Their engagement photos had graced the covers of business magazines, a merger of fortunes celebrated as a modern-day royal wedding. He knew her favorite designer, her preferred vacation spots, the precise, practiced curve of her smile. He did not know the sound of her genuine laughter. It was another transaction in a life full of them, the final piece in his father's grand design. 200 miles away, under the vast open sky of Texas, the scent of motor oil and honest labor clung to the air in Maya Monroe's garage. It was a scent of survival, of legacy. This place, with its worn concrete floors and walls lined with the ghosts of 1,000 repairs, was the last piece of her father she had left. It was her home. Her daughter, 7-year-old Naomi, sat on a clean patch of floor, her chalk drawings of smiling suns and lopsided houses, a vibrant rebellion against the encroaching shadows. Maya watched her, a fierce, protective love swelling in her chest. It was a feeling so potent it was almost painful. It was for Naomi that she fought. It was for Naomi that she endured. The mailman had come an hour earlier. The letter now sat on the workbench, its crisp, expensive paper, a stark intruder in her world of grease and steel. The letterhead bore the name of a prestigious Houston law firm. The words inside were polite, clinical, and utterly devastating. It spoke of the Aurora Rising project. It spoke of final acquisition phases and eminent domain. It gave her 30 days. 30 days to vacate the property her father had built with his bare hands. 30 days to abandon the only home Naomi had ever known. They called it progress. Maya called it erasure. This wasn't about building a better town. It was about building a different one where people like her were no longer welcome, priced out and pushed aside for luxury condos and boutique shops. It was the headline from the national news come to life on her doorstep. Her hand instinctively went to the small worn object tucked beneath her shirt. She pulled out a simple silver chain, and on it a small deep blue sapphire ring. It wasn't fancy, its setting slightly bent from years of wear. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned, a memory from a lifetime ago at the Sunstone Orphanage, a promise from a quiet, sad-eyed boy who understood what it meant to have nothing. He had pressed it into her hand under the shade of a sprawling oak tree. "I'll come back," he'd whispered. He never did. The ring was all that was left, a symbol of a hope so old it had become a scar. Back in his glass tower, Ethan's phone buzzed, shattering the silence. It was his father. There was no greeting. "The Aurora deal is stalling." Carter's voice was like gravel and ice. "The locals are making a fuss. Harrison tells me one mechanic shop is holding out, trying to rally the others. I need you to go down there. Personally. Close it. Your presence will show them we're serious. I have the quarterly review tomorrow," Ethan replied, his voice flat. "The quarterly review can be handled by your board. Your duty is to the future of this company. Your future. The Harringtons will be at the project launch. Don't disappoint them. Don't disappoint me." The line went dead. There was no choice. There never was. Ethan stood up, straightening his tie. He was a CEO going to close a deal. He was a son obeying his father. He was a fiancé securing a merger. He looked at his reflection one last time, a stranger staring back from a gilded cage. He walked out of the boardroom and headed for his car, driving towards a small town named Aurora, a place he considered nothing more than a stubborn line item on a balance sheet. And in that town, Maya Monroe carefully tucked the ring back under her shirt, its cool metal, a familiar weight against her skin. She looked at the eviction notice, then at her daughter, who was now drawing a fortress around her chalk house, protecting it. Maya's resolve hardened. They did not know who they were dealing with. She would not be erased. The sun began to set, casting long shadows that stretched across the highway, connecting the distant city to the small town. A collision was coming, a shadow of progress bearing down on a single, unyielding spark of hope. The Texas sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the long black ribbon of asphalt that cut through the parched landscape. Inside the silent leather and chrome cockpit of his Maserati, Ethan Vance felt a vein begin to throb in his temple. The engine, a masterpiece of Italian engineering, had died without ceremony, leaving him stranded in an ocean of shimmering heat and profound silence. He was a king without a kingdom, his power rendered meaningless by a faulty hose and a complete lack of cell service. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, the sound absorbed by the opulent interior. Useless. Everything was useless. He had tried everything. Restarting the engine only produced a sickening click. His phone remained a dead black mirror. For a man whose entire life was a symphony of scheduled efficiency, this sudden enforced stillness was a special kind of hell. Just as a primal frustration began to curdle into genuine panic, a new sound entered the world. It was the low, steady rumble of an old engine, a sound of function over form. A battered Ford F-150, its paint faded by decades of this very sun, slowed and pulled onto the shoulder ahead of him. The engine sputtered to a halt, and the driver's side door creaked open. It was her, The woman from the garage he was supposed to help put out of business. Maya Monroe stepped out with a firm, unhurried stride. She wore oil-stained jeans and a checkered shirt with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing strong, capable forearms. She didn't offer a smile or a tentative wave. She simply walked towards his car, her eyes assessing the situation with the cool appraisal of a doctor looking at a patient. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze sweeping over the expensive car, then landing on him. "Looks like your day just got complicated," she said. Her voice was even without a trace of pity or glee. Ethan got out of the car, the heat hitting him like a physical blow. He loosened his tie, his default gesture of stress. The engine just cut out. "No warning. They rarely send an invitation," she replied dryly, moving past him to the front of the car. "Pop the hood." He did as he was told, feeling a strange inversion of their presumed roles. He, the CEO, was now taking orders from the small-town mechanic. He watched as she leaned over the engine, her movements economical and sure. For a moment, he found himself studying her hands. They were not the manicured hands of the women in his world. They were scarred and calloused, yet they moved with a precise, confident grace, diagnosing the problem with a series of touches and probes that were a language he would never understand. "It's the coolant bypass hose," she announced after a minute, straightening up. "Split wide open. You're lucky you didn't crack the block." Ethan glanced at his $80,000 watch. The hands seemed to be mocking him. "Look, I'm in a serious jam. Can you fix it fast? I have a multi-million-dollar deal waiting in Aurora." Maya met his gaze, her own eyes unblinking. She didn't seem impressed by the figure he'd dropped. She seemed amused. "And this multi-million-dollar engine is telling me it needs a minute," she said, her tone level, but edged with a fine steel. "You won't be closing any deals if you can't get there, unless your plan is to run." For the first time all day, a genuine, unexpected emotion pricked through Ethan's frustration. He found himself letting out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh. He looked down the empty, sun-baked highway. "My cardio isn't that good." He muttered more to himself than to her. A flicker of a smile touched her lips before vanishing. "I have a spare hose in the truck that should fit. It won't be a Maserati original, but it'll get you to town." She walked back to her F-150. As she rummaged through a large, organized toolbox in the truck bed, Ethan saw her unclasp the silver chain from her neck. It was a fluid, practiced motion. She hung it carefully over her rearview mirror before grabbing her tools, the small, almost insignificant action, a practical measure to keep it from getting caught in the engine. Ethan barely registered it, his mind already back on the ticking clock and the phone call he would have to make to his father. Maya worked quickly. Within 20 minutes, she had the new hose clamped into place, her movements efficient and clean. She filled the radiator with a jug of coolant from her truck. "All right," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Start it up. Gently." Ethan slid back into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, a beautiful throbbing sound of salvation. Relief washed over him so intensely it left him lightheaded. He got out of the car, pulling his wallet. He was back in his element now. A problem had been solved, and it was time for the transaction. He pulled out 5 $100 bills, far more than the job was worth, but it was a way to end the encounter, to put it back in a box he understood. He held the money out to her. "For your time." "Thank you." Maya looked at the bills in his hand, then back at his face. She reached out, and to his astonishment, plucked a single $100 bill from the stack. She tucked it neatly into her pocket. "My price is $100 for an emergency roadside repair. That covers the part and the labor." She said, her gaze steady. "I'm not a charity. She pushed his hand, still holding the other $400, gently back towards him. "You have a good day now. Drive safe." Ethan stood there speechless, the crisp bills feeling foolish and heavy in his hand. In his world, everyone had a price. Everyone took what they could get. This woman, who clearly didn't have much, had just looked his money in the face and found it wanting. She hadn't just fixed his car. She had, in a quiet, profound way, rejected the very language his entire world was built on. She turned and walked back to her truck without a backward glance, leaving him standing in the dust by the side of the road. He watched as she took the silver chain from her mirror and slipped it back around her neck before starting her engine and driving away. He got back into his Maserati, the scent of her competence of oil and honest work faintly lingering in the air. As he pulled back onto the highway, accelerating towards his multi-million-dollar meeting, his mind was no longer on the deal. It was on the woman who had taken just enough, and in doing so, had taken something from him. He didn't know he had to lose. A sliver of his certainty, a piece of his pride. The meeting in Aurora had been a success. The local council swayed by the sheer gravitational pull of Whitaker Global's money, and influence had approved the final zoning changes. Ethan had delivered his speech with practiced charm, his words painting a future of prosperity and growth for the town, a future he was beginning to realize was a beautifully packaged lie. As he drove away from the sterile conference room, the victory felt hollow, tasteless. The crisp satisfaction he usually felt after a successful closing was absent, replaced by a persistent nagging image, a pair of steady hands stained with grease pushing his own money back at him. He told himself it was a matter of due diligence. The temporary hose she had installed was a liability. He as CEO should ensure his vehicle was in perfect condition before the long drive back to Houston. It was a logical, defensible reason. It was also a complete fabrication. He wasn't concerned about the car. He was concerned by a feeling he couldn't name, a curiosity that felt dangerously close to an obsession. He turned the Maserati not towards the highway, but back towards the dusty side street where her garage stood. As he approached, he could hear raised voices cutting through the quiet afternoon air. A sleek black Lincoln, the official chariot of his father's top legal eagles, was parked menacingly close to Maya's old Ford truck. Ethan parked across the street, his instincts telling him to observe before acting. He saw Maya standing near the entrance of her garage, her arms crossed her stance. Defiant. Facing her was a man in an immaculate dark suit, his silver hair glinting in the sun. Mr. Harrison, his father's most effective and most ruthless legal weapon. "The offer is more than generous," Miss Monroe Harrison was saying, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. "It's a chance for a fresh start, a significant sum that would allow you and your daughter to relocate to build a new life somewhere else." "My life is here." Maya's voice was low but didn't tremble. "This is my home. It was my father's home. It's not for sale. Everything is for sale." Harrison chuckled a sound devoid of warmth. "It's simply a matter of finding the right price. The Aurora Rising complex is a reality. It will bring jobs, value, and prestige to this town. You can either be a part of that future with a healthy bank account, or you can be a footnote in its history. A stubborn woman who stood in the way of progress and was inevitably swept aside." The veiled threat was unmistakable. It was the Whitaker Global way, an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Ethan felt a sour taste in his mouth. He had sat in on dozens of meetings where Harrison had outlined these exact tactics. He had always seen it as a game, a strategic chess match. He had never seen the face of the person on the other side of the board. "This isn't progress." Maya shot back, her voice rising with a righteous anger that seemed to make her stand taller. "It's a siege. You people come into towns like ours. You talk about revitalization, and you just push us out. You're not building a community. You're building a monument to your own greed on the rubble of our lives." In her passion, her hand went to her chest, a gesture of defiance and heart. And that's when Ethan saw it. The sun caught the delicate silver chain around her neck and the small, deep blue stone that hung from it. It was the same chain he had seen her hang from her mirror. A sapphire ring. Something deep in his memory, a locked room in the far corner of his mind, began to rattle. He didn't think. He simply moved. He got out of his car and crossed the street, his own expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. "Harrison," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority that made the lawyer flinch. Harrison turned, his composure momentarily broken. "Mr. Vance, I was just finalizing the last acquisition details as per your father's instructions." Ethan's eyes weren't on the lawyer. They were locked on Maya, on the glint of blue against her skin. "I'll handle this," he said, dismissing Harrison with a wave of his hand. The lawyer, though confused, knew better than to argue. He gave a curt nod, shot a venomous look at Maya, and retreated to his Lincoln. The air thrummed with a new, more complicated tension. Maya stared at him, her anger now mixed with a wary, bitter understanding. So the big boss comes down to deliver the final blow himself. He ignored the question, his mind racing, trying to catch the tail of a memory that was as slippery as smoke. "That ring," he said, his voice hoarse. He took a step closer. "The one on your necklace. Where did you get it?" His intensity startled her. The question was too personal, too raw, coming from the man who represented everything that was threatening her. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked, her hand instinctively closing over the ring protecting it. "Please," he said, and the word was stripped of all his usual command. It was a genuine plea. "Just tell me." She searched his eyes and saw not the predatory gleam of a corporate raider, but a deep, unnerving confusion. She didn't know why, but she answered. It was a gift, a long time ago, from a boy at the Sunstone Orphanage. She said the name with a kind of finality, as if closing a book she hadn't opened in years. Sunstone. The word struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a memory, not yet. It was a feeling, the phantom sensation of rough bark against his cheek, the smell of summer rain on dry earth, the echo of a child's voice, a whisper in the dark, promising something he couldn't grasp. He felt a wave of dizziness, a vertigo of the soul. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The defiance in her posture, the unwavering strength in her eyes. There was something there, a familiarity that ran deeper than a chance encounter on a lonely road. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know how it was possible, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that his father's carefully planned real estate project had just collided with his own buried, forgotten past. And he had a terrible feeling that the foundations of his entire life were about to crack. The 72 hours that followed were a blur of quiet dread. Maya Monroe felt as if she were living in the final moments before a storm, the air thick and heavy with an unspoken, inevitable doom. She kept the garage door open, the familiar sounds of her tools, a small, defiant protest against the encroaching silence. She tried to smile for Naomi to play games with chalk on the floor, but the smile felt like a fragile mask, and the fortress Naomi drew around their chalk house felt tragically naive. Hope was a dwindling currency. On the third day, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long funereal shadows across the yard, the sleek black Lincoln returned. This time, Mr. Harrison did not get out alone. He was flanked by 2 local sheriff's deputies, their presence a formal, unassailable display of power. This was no longer a negotiation. This was a final verdict. Harrison approached a sheaf of papers in his hand. He no longer wore the mask of corporate civility. His face was a cold, impassive slate. Ms. Munro, he began, his voice devoid of any emotion. The grace period has expired. This is a court-ordered writ of possession. The deputies are here to ensure a peaceful transfer of the property. You have 1 hour to remove your personal belongings. Peaceful. The word was a grotesque mockery. This was violence sanitized by legal jargon. You can't do this. Maya whispered, her body instinctively moving to shield Naomi, who had run to hide behind her mother's legs. It is already done, Harrison said, his voice flat. He gestured for the deputies to step forward. It was in that moment of absolute crushing defeat that the silver Maserati reappeared, pulling up so fast that its tires spit gravel. The engine cut, and the sudden silence was more shocking than its roar. Ethan Vance got out of the car, his face pale, his eyes burning with an intensity Maya had not seen before. He had spent 2 days and 2 sleepless nights with a single word echoing in his mind. Sunstone, sunstone, sunstone. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he had to come back. He had to know. He walked directly into the heart of the standoff, his presence so unexpected that even the deputies paused. He ignored them all, his gaze fixed on Maya. But before he could speak, Harrison stepped in, annoyed by the interruption. Mr. Vance, this is an official matter. Please allow us to handle it. Handle it. Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. He turned to face the lawyer, and for the first time, Harrison saw something in the young CEO's eyes that wasn't boredom or detached authority. It was fury. By terrorizing a woman and her child. That's enough, Harrison. Leave. The command was absolute. The deputies looked at each other confused. Harrison's face tightened. Your father gave explicit instructions, and I am giving you new ones. Ethan cut him off, taking a step forward. Get in your car and go. Now. Harrison, a man who had verbally dismantled entire companies, found himself taking an involuntary step back. He saw the shift, the raw power that had, until now, laid dormant in the air. He gave a curt, angry nod and motioned for the deputies to stand down. As the Lincoln pulled away, Maya stared at Ethan, the brief flare of hope in her chest instantly extinguished by a cold, dawning horror. He had dismissed Harrison as if swatting a fly. He held the power. He was the power. The polite stranger, the man she had felt a flicker of connection with, was a lie. A Vance, she breathed the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. Of course. You were just playing with me. The concerned questions, the curiosity. It was all just part of the game, wasn't it? The final personal touch before you take everything. No, he said, his voice ragged. Maya, it's not like that. That name, Sunstone. Her heart, already broken, seemed to shatter. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. That he would use her most private memory, the last pure thing she held on to, as a weapon against her. Don't you dare say that name, she cried out, her voice cracking with the pain of a 20-year-old wound. Don't you speak of it, the boy who gave me this ring, the one who made a promise to me under the old oak tree at Sunstone. He would have died before he became someone like you. The promise, under the old oak tree. The final key turned. The locked door in his mind didn't just open, it splintered into 1,000 pieces. The world around him dissolved into a tidal wave of memory. He is 9 years old. The scratchy wool of an orphanage blanket against his cheek. The name they gave him, Leo, the gnawing loneliness that was a constant companion. And then her. A girl with fierce, bright eyes who wasn't afraid of anything. Maya. She didn't laugh when he cried. She shared her food with him. She taught him how to skip stones. The last day. The day the wealthy couple came for him. The day they told him his new name would be Ethan. He knew he was leaving forever. He stole his foster mother's sapphire ring, the only beautiful thing he had ever seen. He found Maya under the oak tree, their special place, her small, warm hand in his. The feel of the cool metal as he pressed the ring into her palm. "I'll come back," he'd whispered, a desperate, childish vow against the coming darkness. "I promise." Her face stained with tears as they led him away to a new car, a new life, a new name, and a future designed to make him forget everything that had come before. The past slammed back into the present with the force of a physical impact. He stumbled back, his breath gone, his vision blurred. He looked at the woman before him, her face a mask of rage and betrayal. He saw the little girl. Maya. He gasped, his throat tight, his own name feeling like a lie. That boy. His name. It wasn't Ethan. He choked on the words. They called me Leo. It was me. God, Maya. It was me. The fury on her face dissolved, replaced by a wave of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, with a horror that mirrored his own. The world stopped spinning. The eviction notice, forgotten, fluttered from her hand and landed in the dust between them. He had come back. Not as a savior. Not as a long-lost friend. He had returned as the architect of her ruin, the living, breathing, final betrayal of the only promise that had ever mattered. The world had gone silent. The deputies, sensing a situation that had spiraled far beyond a simple eviction, had retreated to their cars. Harrison was gone. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. All that remained was the impossible, catastrophic truth hanging in the air between them. Ethan could not look at her. To see her face would be to see the full measure of his monstrous betrayal. He was a ghost, wearing another man's suit, a walking lie. He turned, stumbling back towards his car like a man waking from a 20-year coma. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't offer an excuse. There were no words in any language that could bridge the chasm that had just opened at their feet. He got in, started the engine, and drove. He didn't know where he was going. He was just fleeing the wreckage of himself. Leo. The name echoed in the silent chambers of his heart. It felt both foreign and more real than the name he had answered to for 2 decades. The memories no longer fragmented, now played in a vivid, agonizing loop. Leo and Maya sharing a stolen apple under the shade of the oak. Leo promising to write. Leo promising to come back. And Ethan the man who had buried Leo so deep that not even a flicker of him remained. His father hadn't just given him a new life. He had performed an excision of the soul, leaving behind a polished, hollow shell. He drove until the manicured suburbs of Houston melted into the anonymous sprawl of highways and finally pulled into the parking lot of a cheap, nameless motel on the edge of town. The room smelled of stale smoke and disinfectant. It was the antithesis of his entire existence, and for that reason it felt like the only appropriate place for him to be. He stood in front of the warped mirror above the dresser and stared at his reflection. He saw the tailored shirt, the platinum watch, the face of a man who commanded billions. He saw the face of a coward, a promise breaker, the monster from a little girl's story. Back in Aurora, the shock that had frozen Maya in place began to thaw, replaced by a slow-burning fire. It was an anger so pure and cold it felt like strength. She looked at her daughter, who was now quietly crying, and knew she could not afford to break. She had been betrayed by a memory, by a ghost, but she would not be defeated by a corporation. The revelation hadn't just given her pain, it had given her a target. It had given her a name. Vance. She picked up the phone. Her hands were steady. She dialed the number of her neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, the retired union organizer, who had been the first to warn her about the buyout letters. "Henderson," she said, her voice clear and hard as iron. "It's Maya. Call everyone. We need to meet. Tonight. At my garage. What's happened, child? I know who we're fighting now," she said. "And I know how we're going to win." She hung up her personal grief, now forged into a communal weapon. She was no longer a single woman fighting for her home. She was the heart of a resistance. In the dim motel room, Ethan finally did what he knew he had to do. He pulled out his phone and dialed his father's private number. Carter answered on the first ring. "It's done, I assume." Carter said, his voice clipped and impatient. "Her name is Maya Monroe." Ethan said, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. "From the Sunstone Orphanage." "You knew." It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. When Carter spoke again, there was no surprise, only a chilling pragmatism. A loose end from a necessary transaction. "I took you from nothing, Ethan. I gave you the world. That life has responsibilities. It requires you to be unsentimental." Unsentimental. Ethan choked out a laugh that sounded like a sob. She was a child. I was a child. I made her a promise, and I erased that child to make you a king. Carter's voice was like stone. "That promise is worthless. The boy you were is gone. I made sure of it. His weakness would have destroyed you. It would have destroyed everything I have built. So you just buried him. You buried me. I gave you power. I gave you a future. Now you have a choice. It's the most important choice of your life." Carter's voice dropped, becoming a blade of ice. "You can cling to the ghost of a penniless girl from a slum, or you can embrace the empire I am giving you. You can have your inheritance, your position, your marriage to Elise, or you can have your childish sentiment. You cannot have both." The line went dead. Ethan let the phone fall from his hand. The ultimatum hung in the silent room, absolute and unyielding. His father had confirmed it all. He had not only orchestrated the destruction of Maya's past, but he had also orchestrated the destruction of Ethan's. There was no middle ground. There was no path to redemption within his father's world. To stay would be to consent to the murder of his own soul, to forever be the hollow man in the mirror. The choice was a guillotine, and yet for the first time in his life, it was his. Truly his. He looked around the cheap motel room. This was nothing. He had nothing. No, that wasn't true. He had a memory. He had a broken promise. And he had a choice. He walked over to the small desk, opened his laptop and powered it on. The screen bathed his face in a cool blue light. His fingers, which had signed billion-dollar contracts, moved to the keyboard. He wasn't a CEO anymore. He wasn't the heir. He was Leo, and Leo had come back. He began to type his movements, sure and deliberate. He navigated past the public interface of the Whitaker Global Network towards the deep encrypted firewalls where the real secrets were kept. He was going to burn his father's empire to the ground, even if it meant he would be consumed by the flames. It was nearly midnight when the headlights of a nondescript rental car cut through the darkness outside Maya's garage. She was inside cleaning her tools with a mechanical numbing rhythm, her mind still a whirlwind of shock and anger. When she saw him step out of the car, her entire body tensed. He looked nothing like the CEO she had met. His tie was gone, His expensive shirt was wrinkled, and the look in his eyes was one of utter exhaustion. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. He didn't approach the house. He walked to the entrance of the garage, the heart of her world, and stopped just at the edge of the light, as if seeking permission to enter. He held up a small, slim object, a flash drive. "I can't ask for your forgiveness," he said, his voice low and raspy. "I don't deserve it, and I can't undo what my father did, what I was a part of." He took a hesitant step forward, placing the flash drive on the edge of her workbench. "But I can give you the weapons to fight him. Everything I could find is on here. Contracts with illegal clauses, internal emails, falsified environmental reports, proof of everything he did to this town. To you." Maya stared at the small piece of plastic. It looked so insignificant, yet it held the promise of justice or the potential for a deeper betrayal. Her first instinct was to throw it back in his face, to scream at him to leave and never return. But then she looked past him at the small house where her daughter was sleeping, and she knew she couldn't afford pride. She needed leverage. She needed a weapon. "I'll look at it," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "If it's real, we'll talk. If this is some kind of trick—" "It's not," he said simply. "I'm done with tricks. I'm done with lies." The days that followed were a surreal truce. The garage became their war room. Billion-dollar corporate secrets printed out on flimsy paper were spread across a workbench stained with 20 years of motor oil. Ethan, the man who once moved markets with a single phone call, now sat on a rickety stool explaining the intricacies of shell corporations and predatory loan agreements. Maya, in turn, gave those abstract crimes a human face. She pointed to a parcel of land on a map. That was the Hendersons' farm, she'd say. They were forced to sell after their well was mysteriously contaminated. "This report you found shows Whitaker Global owned the company that did the drilling." He would flinch at every new revelation, every story of a family pushed to the brink. He was not just seeing his father's greed, he was seeing the shrapnel from an explosion his father had detonated long ago, and he was standing at ground zero. Trust was not a gift. It was a structure they built together, piece by painstaking piece, in the quiet, late hours of the night. It was built when he tirelessly cross-referenced legal documents, his focus absolute. It was built when she brought him a hot cup of coffee, no words needed. One night, exhausted from staring at spreadsheets, Maya decided she needed to do something with her hands. She started working on the carburetor of an old truck that had been sitting in the corner. After a moment, she sighed in frustration. "What is it?" Ethan asked, looking up from his laptop. "This bolt is seized. I need more torque than I can get from this angle. I need someone to hold the assembly steady from the other side." She looked at him. "Think you can handle that?" He looked from his laptop to the greasy engine block with a kind of mild panic. "I'm not sure I know what an assembly is." She let out a small, tired laugh. She grabbed a heavy wrench and handed it to him. "Okay, I need you to just hold this part. Right here. And don't let it move. At all." Ethan took the wrench, fumbling with it for a moment. It was heavy, solid, and utterly foreign in his hands. "In my world," he said, finding his footing, "delegating is how you loosen things." Maya's lips quirked into a genuine, unguarded smile. It was the first one he had ever seen from her, and it hit him with surprising force. "Welcome to the real world," she said, her voice softer now. "We don't have interns for this. And try not to get that grease on the legal documents. They're slightly more important than your shirt." He laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound echoed in the quiet garage, breaking through days of accumulated tension. In that shared moment of levity, something shifted. The wall between them, the one built of suspicion and pain, developed a crack. Later, as they sat across from each other at the workbench again, the silence was different. It was comfortable. "Leo," she said softly, not looking at him. "Was that really your name?" He nodded, tracing a pattern on a dusty map with his finger. "It was, for the first 9 years of my life. I think my father wanted to erase him. The boy who was poor, who was nobody. He couldn't build an empire with a foundation like that. He wasn't a nobody," she whispered. "He was my friend." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "I'm sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry I didn't remember. That I didn't come back. You're back now," she said, and her gaze held no accusation, only a complex, weary acceptance. It was in that moment, with their hands just inches apart on the cluttered workbench, that they both felt it. A pull, a connection that was deeper than a shared past forged in the crucible of their present fight. It was Ethan who broke the spell, his voice regaining its strategic focus. "The press conference," he said, pointing to a date on a calendar. "The official launch for the Aurora Rising project. My father will be there. The board will be there. The media will be there. He's planning to announce the final phase and name me as the head of the entire division." He looked at Maya, his eyes now clear and hard with purpose. It's his moment of ultimate triumph. It's the perfect stage for his downfall. A plan began to form, a daring, impossible gambit. He knew the event schedule, the security protocols, the back end of the presentation software. She knew the human cost, the stories of the people whose lives were line items in those presentations. They were no longer a CEO and a mechanic. They were an alliance. Two forgotten people ready to remind the world that the truth, no matter how deep you bury it, always finds a way to the surface. The ballroom of the Houston Grand Hotel was a galaxy of artificial light and calculated power. Gleaming marble floors reflected the towering banners of the Aurora Rising logo, a stylized sunrise that promised a new dawn built on old sorrows. The air thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and the low murmur of influential voices buzzed with anticipation. At the center of it all stood Carter Vance, a king in his court, accepting congratulations, with a smile that was both a greeting and a dismissal. This was to be his crowning achievement. From a dimly lit corner near the back of the room, Maya watched him. She stood with a small, defiant group of her neighbors from Aurora. They were dressed in their Sunday best, looking entirely out of place, and that was the point. They were ghosts at the feast, a living testament to the human cost of the glorious project being celebrated. She felt a hand slip into hers. It was Ethan. He wore the same kind of tailored suit as every other man in the room, but he moved through the crowd like a phantom unseen, and unheard, his face set with a grim, quiet resolve. "Are you ready?" He whispered, his eyes not leaving his father on the distant stage. "I've been ready for 20 years, she answered, squeezing his hand. The master of ceremonies, a man with a voice as smooth as polished wood, began the introductions. He spoke of vision of legacy, of the great Carter Vance. The applause was thunderous. Then he called the heir to the stage, and now to share his vision for the future of this landmark project, the CEO of Whitaker Global, Mr. Ethan Vance. Ethan released Maya's hand and walked towards the stage, every head turned. He was the golden son, the future of the empire. Carter beamed at him from the front row, a look of supreme paternal pride on his face. Ethan stepped up to the podium, the bright lights hot on his face. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Then his gaze found Maya's, a small, steady anchor in the glittering ocean. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He began his speech, his voice calm and familiar, echoing the corporate platitudes everyone expected. Thank you. It is an honor to be here to stand on the precipice of a new era for Aurora, a project that speaks to the heart of what we at Whitaker Global do best, building the future. Carter leaned back in his chair, satisfied. But progress, Ethan continued, his voice shifting. Taking on a new, harder edge always has a cost. And tonight I think it's time we talked about the true cost of Aurora Rising. He pressed a small hidden button. Behind him, the giant screen, which was supposed to be displaying a breathtaking architectural rendering, flickered. A new image appeared, a scanned copy of a legal document, a land transfer agreement with a key signature circled in red. An internal email materialized next to it, its text cold and damning. Henderson's resistance is a problem. Contaminate the well. We can acquire the land for pennies on the dollar once it's declared unusable. A wave of confused murmurs swept through the ballroom. Carter shot bolt upright in his seat, his face contorting in disbelief, then rage. He furiously motioned to the tech booth to cut the feed, but nothing happened. Ethan had locked them out. This project, Ethan's voice, now rang with the clarity of a bell, was not built on a vision for the future. It was built on a foundation of lies. Another document flashed on the screen, a falsified environmental report. Then another, a death certificate for a man who had died of a heart attack just weeks after refusing to sell his property. It was built on blackmail, on intimidation, and on the destruction of a community. The room was in an uproar. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Reporters were scrambling their voices, a cacophony of questions. Carter, his face ashen, stormed towards the stage, roaring his son's name. Ethan, what is the meaning of this? Shut it down, I'm just showing them the truth, Father Ethan said, looking down at the man who had created him and tried to destroy him. The truth you worked so hard to bury. Just then, the ballroom doors at the back swung open. Two men in dark suits, their faces impassive, walked in, followed by federal agents. They moved through the panicked crowd with an unhurried, inexorable purpose, their path leading directly to the stage, directly to Carter Vance. The show was over. 6 months later, the Texas sun felt different. It felt warmer, cleaner. The Aurora Rising project was a ghost, a half-finished skeleton of concrete and steel, now entangled in years of federal litigation. In its place, the town of Aurora was quietly healing. Monroe Auto Works was busier than ever. The old faded sign had been replaced by a new one, hand-painted by Naomi, that read, Monroe and Son Garage. It was a joke that had stuck. Inside, Ethan, dressed in worn jeans and a grease-stained T-shirt, expertly tightened the last bolt on a rebuilt carburetor. He wiped his hands on a rag, a gesture he had now perfected, and looked at his work with a quiet pride. Maya came over, wiping her own hands, and inspected his work with a playful, critical eye. Not bad, she said, a smile tugging at her lips. For a guy who used to think horsepower was just a term they used in a board meeting. Ethan laughed, a full, easy sound that reached his eyes. Hey, I'm a fast learner. He looked at her, his expression turning serious for a moment, the humor giving way to a deeper truth. Turns out it's a lot easier to fix an engine than it is to fix a broken promise. Her smile softened. She reached out and gently brushed a smudge of grease from his cheek. Well, she said softly, you did both. That evening, the three of them, Ethan, Maya, and Naomi, sat on the porch of the small house next to the garage. The air was filled with the sound of crickets and Naomi's happy chatter. Ethan had lost an empire of fortune and name. But as he sat there watching the woman he loved and the girl who looked at him with trusting eyes, he knew he had gained the world. He had no inheritance, no legacy to speak of. He just had this, a quiet evening, a home that had been saved, a peace that had been earned at the highest possible cost. And for the first time in his entire life, he felt truly immeasurably rich. A promise made by a child buried for 20 years under the weight of an empire finally found its way home. Ethan Vance lost everything the world considered valuable, only to gain the one thing he truly needed: peace. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of our own promises are lying dormant, just waiting for the right moment to call us back to who we were meant to be. Perhaps true wealth isn't about building skyscrapers that touch the sky, but about rebuilding the small, vital bridges that connect one human heart to another. This story of a promise finally left a deep impression on us, and we believe the most powerful stories are the ones we share and discuss together. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you believe Ethan's ultimate sacrifice was enough to truly atone for the 2 decades of silence? Let us know in the comments below. And as we continue to create these stories, your feedback is our most valuable guide. If there was a moment you loved, or an idea that could make our future tales even more compelling, please share it with us. We read every single comment. If this story of redemption and earned peace touched your heart, please give it a like. And if you know someone who might find strength in its message, consider sharing it with them. To join us on more emotional journeys like this one, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss where our stories take us next. Until then, feel free to explore another story waiting for you on the screen now. Thank you for listening.